Currently, Grand Theft Auto 6 is scheduled for Thursday, the 19th of November 2026, the last week before the American Thanksgiving holiday, which usually is used as the opening of the mass sales window running up to Christmas. The question is, though, what does this single megaton title mean for Nintendo's strategy this year? From retail realities to marketing considerations to Nintendo's own development timelines, in this video I want to deep dive all the considerations for if, how, why, and when Nintendo's 2026 schedule has been affected by the likely release of Grand Theft Auto 6, including the potential impact on a 3D Mario holiday game. Let's start, as we always must, with numbers and the simple logistics that follow from them. GTA 5's lifetime sales are nearly 3 times huger than Nintendo sellers like Wii Fit and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and as the new game will launch on hardware with a very well-established install base, we can expect the velocity to be extremely high out of the gate. There are definite physical limitations as a consequence when it comes to retailer space. Now, the game itself is probably not such a big issue from this perspective. My back-of-the-envelope calculations are that the same space of one Switch 2 console would permit 15 physical copies of GTA 6 on PlayStation 5 to be stored. It's perfectly plausible to me that the sales velocity of GTA 6 could be 15 times the Switch 2 at launch, but probably not 30 or 50 times, and of course many of these sales will be digital anyway. Having said that, it's not like the games themselves will be the only factor to consider. Retailers and manufacturers will want to be upselling customers on multiple other products at the same time. Bespoke controllers, posters, memorabilia, plus of course consoles, which will see a spike in demand, and in any event, these will all require storage as well. Shipments of the games themselves might start arriving the week before, or perhaps a little bit earlier, to build up enough stock, but other attendant merchandise will also need to accrue on shelves in advance. Plus, the stores will likely want to minimize the footprint taken up by stuff that isn't selling at the same velocity. Nintendo's required shelf space is fairly unobtrusive, especially with the digital versions sold in stores taking up less space than full games on the shelf. Indeed, it seems to me that the negative press for retailers' digital being given a price advantage might be ameliorated by the fact that the digital codes offer them greater leeway in terms of shelf space this particular holiday season, since they can be stacked deep as opposed to the plastic game cartridge cases. But the purpose of Nintendo's retail relations isn't simply to be available, but also for their content to be seen, for people to wander into stores and see Mario on screens and in big cardboard displays. It's a serious spoke in the wheels of a major launch plan if that promotional space is being ceded to a different game. Therefore, I would say there's a blast radius, if you will, of the period most affected by GTA. The whole of November and most of December is probably effectively a very difficult period to release any major new title with a view to physical distribution. The rather cynical part of me wonders whether this would be the absolutely ideal time for all concerned to bump up the Switch 2's price. Generally speaking, a mid-holiday price bump would be lunacy, and I doubt they would frame it in this way, but if they released a strictly limited edition Switch 2 model in early October, perhaps with a particularly advantageous pricing point, much like the Mario Kart World deal last year, retailers would be able to shift huge amounts of stock through October with demand front-loaded early in the holiday window, freeing up shelf space for November. If the rumours of an Ocarina of Time remake and a special Switch 2 bundle are indeed true, it would fit this model exactly, since we know that Zelda sells machines in a big way and would be perfect for selling a whole host of limited edition Zelda paraphernalia off the back of it. However, for a broader assessment of how Nintendo views GTA, we need to look at precedents, and the difficulty is that there aren't very many that apply in this case. In 2013, when GTA 5 launched, Nintendo followed it up within a week with Wii Fit U, a sequel to their biggest selling title ever, but while GTA 5 set records from launch with massive sales, I'm not sure even the strong GTA 4 sales presaged it being such a massive event. Wii Fit U, on the other hand, was, yes, an obvious counter-schedule in some ways for a game like GTA, both being huge properties but still having that massive blue ocean between them, which was a deep cobalt blue. And yet Wii Fit U did not even scratch 1 million in sales on the Wii U. Then again, it was on the Wii U, and hardly anything did break big numbers. I wouldn't rush to blame scheduling for that game's poor performance, but I would note that Nintendo will have the data and the research from 2013 on hand, and they may well have examined the effect of launching what they obviously hoped would be a substantial title for them in the immediate wake of GTA 5's massive success. For perhaps the closest recent equivalent, we could look back to 2018 when Red Dead Redemption 2 launched. This time Nintendo played it a little differently. Red Dead Redemption 2 launched on the 26th of October and racked up $725 million in sales that weekend, reportedly the biggest sales weekend of any product in entertainment history. Nintendo did not completely vacate holiday 2018 though. Super Mario Party launched on the 5th of October, whereas Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee launched on the 16th of November. In between, they had just one title that they published for Switch, The World Ends With You Final Remix, which went out just a week after Super Mario Party on the 12th of October. Even as recently as 2018, Nintendo was not as committed to big gaps between their releases, especially in the holiday seasons, and games releasing on consecutive weeks, even quite big titles like Fire Emblem Warriors' Western launch, which followed the week after Super Mario Odyssey, were not at that stage completely uncommon. They also never really showed as much care for games they published as games that they developed themselves. Note that they burned off Octopath Traveler, a title which had been quite a major deal in the Switch launch presentation in January 2017, by scheduling it on the exact same day as the launch of Captain Toad Treasure Tracker's Switch and 3DS launches. They also did not vacate the Red Dead Redemption 2 area completely. Luigi's Mansion for 3DS released on the 12th of October in the USA, but the 8th of November in Japan and other territories were staggered in between those two dates. Again, staggered releases were still not uncommon during this period, but it does suggest that Nintendo of America may have wanted to pull forward the Luigi's Mansion release because of the unique impact of Red Dead Redemption 2 on their market particularly, whereas in Japan they were perhaps far less concerned about the effect of an American Western. There was also on the 16th of October 2018 a game that is again drawing a lot of attention, Starlink Battle for Atlas, which was a third-party game but did include a playable appearance from everyone's favourite Cosmic Canid, Star Fox. Also, we have to put 2018 in the context that the Nintendo release pace was just very slow generally. They had nothing for Switch in either August or September, apart from the Labo vehicle kit. Even July was coasting on Octopath and the Captain Toad re-release. My point is that it's not like Nintendo had a dense schedule of first-party original content that they needed to juggle around to make room for Red Dead Redemption 2's launch, but it does appear that they took some sensible steps to avoid there being too much of a clash. Rockstar confirmed the Red Dead Redemption 2 release date on the 1st of February 2018, so Nintendo's entire schedule for that holiday period was revealed in knowledge of that date, since the latter half of the year was mainly confirmed in the release of the March 2018 Nintendo Direct and the June E3 presentation. It is possible, of course, that one major game of the holiday window, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, could have been delayed out of October 2018 to avoid a specific showdown with Red Dead Redemption 2, but I rather doubt this. Not only do we know that Nintendo finished New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe beforehand and released it very early in January, suggesting that it was a belt and braces game in case Smash missed the window. Not only does Nintendo have a long track record of using December for games that are on tight development times but which are commercially important for a given year, see Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Metroid Prime 4 for other examples, but we also know from Sakurai that development only started in February 2016, giving it an incredibly short timeline for a game that Sakurai himself described as a miracle. I think therefore that Smash's placement owes more to Nintendo's development priorities than to commercial considerations relating to a game on other hardware. In any event, while Red Dead Redemption 2 is currently neck and neck with Wii Sports and just behind GTA 5 in the rankings of the best-selling games of all time, the rank doesn't reflect the true gulf between them. GTA 5 has sold nearly 3 times Red Dead Redemption 2. It's reasonable to expect absolute rocket sales for the first few days and in the whole holiday season thereafter as a result. So this opens a number of questions. To what extent does a game with a mature and more Western-focused audience threaten Nintendo's approach? What are the implications for retailers and marketing? And what other logistical consequences do we need to bear in mind? One obvious consideration is whether or not Switch 2 will host some version of the game. This seems unlikely, but isn't perhaps completely impossible. A day one co-release would be a mind-blowing coup for Nintendo, but even if they're in negotiations with Rockstar for a potential Switch 2 version of some kind down the track, they may feel general courtesy and harmonious relations, of the sort that are generally prized in Japanese corporate culture, would preclude too aggressive a move to encroach onto GTA 5's territory. Then again, Rockstar themselves chose the holiday window. In theory, the game could launch any time and still be a colossal success, something Nintendo has proved themselves. The holiday window is a huge boost to sales in general, and Nintendo need to consider whether the competition of this one title is enough to outweigh the uplift in sales more generally from placing their big titles into these couple of months. There is a precedent of Nintendo clearing the massive space for a third-party game, albeit a game that actually was launching on a Nintendo system, and that was particularly big in Japan. 2021's Monster Hunter's Rise was given the plum spot of the end of March game. Again, it's difficult to know how much of this was due to Rise itself, a huge deal especially in Japan, and how much was due to Nintendo's lack of a content pipeline due to the pandemic. But the only first-party game that quarter was Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury in mid-February, and because the two games were equidistant in the quarter, it suggests that they saw Monster Hunter not like Octopath and The World Ends With You as a peripheral concern to their own developed titles, despite the fact they actually published those two titles themselves, but rather they saw Rise as a major event in the Switch calendar in its own right. Even if GTA 6 isn't on Switch 2, the scale of the release could be enough to trigger similar concerns. In 2020, NPD Group reported that 70% of Switch owners then owned a secondary system. If the numbers are remotely similar now, then it's very likely that a huge chunk of the Switch install base will be putting their cash into GTA 6 this November, and given that the game is likely to be both huge and pricey, that may limit the scope of what Nintendo can put out. So, how does Nintendo balance having a strong quarter with the huge gravitational pull of a megaton title? We saw kind of how they do this in 2018 when Nintendo used the very earliest date in October for Super Mario Party. 1st of October this year is a Thursday, the day they usually release titles, and it strikes me that this could be an ideal date for them to utilise. Over a month clear of the GTA 6 launch, it's still in the same quarter, and so sales will count in that window for the purposes of investor reporting. Of course, a slightly weaker holiday quarter is manageable if Nintendo have a good narrative and are clear about a pipeline of major games coming forward in the imminent future. One reason I'm very confident 3D Mario will be announced this year, in fact, is that I think they do need it to show that they have a good pipeline of games coming forward. But all this said, it's better to avoid the issue entirely by having, as far as they can, a strong holiday quarter this year. Nintendo is a competitive company, but part of being competitive is being tactical. We saw in 2013 that they counter-scheduled a game with a true Blue Ocean approach, and while Wii Fit U pretty much failed, I'm not sure the concept is intrinsically all that bad. A new Sing Party or Brain Training or Fitness Boxing, even a Kirby title, would appeal to an audience that is largely completely different from Grand Theft Auto 6. Now even then, there might be a dent. Yes, the audiences of those games are likely different within the sphere of video games, but when you're talking a title that is potentially shifting tens of millions, the chances are still high that there is some cross-pollination of attention. Also, Nintendo's profit trendline is not borne aloft on the shoulders of Sing Party. What Nintendo need more than anything else for 2026 is a major Western release. Metroid Prime 4 clearly did not do the numbers they might have hoped for, and while Japanese sales numbers are very healthy, in the US the kinds of games that really go over well in Western markets are yet to emerge, the Marios, the Zeldas, and so on. We also have to remember that Nintendo will have been developing these games and their overall content strategy for years, long before Rockstar gave this specific date for GTA 6, which of course may not even be kept, although the longer we go into the year, the more difficult it is to believe that there will be a delay given the huge logistical challenge of the release and the cost and complexity of rerouting all that to a new release window. They announced May 2026 as a release date, the prior May and November 2026 as the release date the November before, so if we pass May without incident, I think we can start to assume that November is indeed a lock. Given that Nintendo may well have been anticipating May 2026 for a period of time, there is little evidence that their 2026 schedule has massively changed as a consequence. The Mario film was locked into the 3-year anniversary of its predecessor, and Tomodachi Life was announced for 2026, weeks before May became the GTA 6 date. So while theoretically they could have moved Tomodachi to a different point in the 2026 calendar, it does strike me as the sort of game, Japan-focused, ultra-chilled, on lower-powered hardware, that's about as good a counter-schedule for GTA 6 as you could aim for. There's also quite a history of Nintendo releasing these kinds of casual titles in the April, May, June window. Actually, I think we can reasonably infer that Nintendo was planning for this year's schedule all the way back in 2020. Let me unpick the thinking here because it relies on us exploring what Nintendo knew or planned at various points over the last decade. And while I'm sure they did not have anything firmly locked down, you can imagine various contingencies and general ideas being in play. While a Mario movie was in discussion for a very long time, and Nintendo President Tatsumi Kimishima once expressed hope that the Illumination deal would see a Mario title eventuate for 2020, his successor Shuntaro Furukawa updated this in January 2020 to an expected 2022 release window, and it seems that December 2022 stuck for a long time until close to launch it was moved for reasons that were never fully explained to the 7th of April 2023. We decided to move the global release to spring 2023 was the message that was given at the time, which was different from the production reasons cited by Miyamoto for the Zelda movie's release date change to May 2027, albeit that change happened much earlier in production. Now, while Universal may have had their own reasons for moving, such as avoiding Avatar and Black Panther, that month of December didn't have any obvious massive hit cartoon movies in the same kind of category as Mario, and so the real reason may have been pressure from Nintendo themselves. These films are essentially massive game advertisements, and advertising at the tail end of November might not be as profitable for them from a Nintendo perspective as advertising in April when they have the whole year to start selling consoles. Also conspicuous for receiving a delay at this time was Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which moved from 2022 to May 2023, slipstreaming the movie. Plus, while Mario Maker 2 released in June 2019 and a 3.5-year development window for the next 2D Mario game might have seemed perfectly reasonable from a 2019 perspective, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which must have been in development through much of the pandemic, ultimately released in October 2023, 4.5 years after the previous EPT-10 Mario title, though notably that group did have a splinter crew with the heavy support of 8ing that put out Pikmin 4 in July 2023 as well. The movie in April, Tears of the Kingdom in May, and Super Mario Bros. For the holiday season was a good plan, and of course, did work out very well for Nintendo during that year in the end. However, if in 2020 Nintendo was thinking that December 2022 would be the Mario movie, it might make sense for Wonder to release either in holiday 2022 to coincide with the film, or perhaps shortly after. Probably not October 2023, as by that time the film hype would have fizzled away, but perhaps in March or June, which has been a traditional slot for Mario games. As it turns out, whether by intent or happenstance, we have seen their approach in 2023 as it fully eventuated being repeated in 2026, and that has been to look to inflate sales of their existing Mario products going into the film, and then to ride the wave of the success with major product launches in the months after. Of course, we don't exactly know at the time of recording what those major product launches are, but we can assume that there will be some. So, knowing that 3 years would be Nintendo's expected window for a sequel film, and with their hopes being high that the first Mario film would warrant an immediate sequel, since after all that was the point of them trying to build a film empire, Nintendo would probably have anticipated December 2025 as the release date for the second film from the vantage point of around 2020. This would be the midpoint of the 40th anniversary, and so if they thought that this was going to be their second film release date, therefore their big 3D game would have been scheduled for March, June, or perhaps even October of 2026. But while 6 years is a long time for planning, the course of true game development never did run smooth. This is why in many respects I found it plausible that Nintendo could have looked into 2020 and 2021 to seek to subdivide their Mario teams down with a course-based 3D Mario team aiming for 2026 and a more open-focused game on a very long time frame aiming for a release coincident with the surely inevitable third Mario film. At any rate, with this history in mind, are Nintendo now going to budge for GTA 6? Well, October has traditionally been a Mario window, but the blunt fact is that Mario could release at any period of the year and still do well. It's not contingent on a holiday season to drive sales. If there was no other issue, 1st of October or September or even July would all be great potential Mario dates. Therefore, I don't buy that the game was any kind of lock for 2026 until GTA 6 muscled in. What I do think GTA removes is the flexibility to do a Smash or Metroid Prime 4 and release the game later if it's going to be a little bit tight, November or December. But here's the thing, Nintendo actually does this fairly often with its big titles. Splatoon 3 moved to the Xenoblade 3 slot at the end of September 2022. Fire Emblem Three Houses slipped from 2018 and then from spring 2019 to release in July 2019. Animal Crossing New Horizons slipped out of 2019 and then into March 2020. Sure, Nintendo does sit on games for a good while at times, but with these major titles, there is little evidence that they have much leeway, and the final approach to a game's release can be a tense time, and there are often slippages of a few weeks or months. It's much easier, therefore, to make the decision in mid-2026 to commit to a 2027 release and take away that pressure than to roll the dice on 2026 but find that they need extra time and then push themselves into a conflict with a game that they do not want to clash with. This also may contribute to the perceived murkiness of their 2026 schedule, since a major tentpole title would have consequences for everything else around it. However, Nintendo will not want to risk the perception of a flat holiday. Splatoon Raiders might do well, but Splatoon, while a hit, is principally a Japanese phenomenon. An anchor title with a broad Western appeal as well as high sales potential, like Ocarina of Time, even if it releases on the 1st of October, which is a Thursday and therefore the earliest point in the quarter they could release a game, would go a long way to spare any kind of blushes from Nintendo about the perception of a weak quarter. It would certainly drive game sales, but the likely and already rumoured emergence of a Zelda model Switch 2 would also push consoles, and frankly, in terms of absolute numbers, we're not necessarily looking at so major a potential drop-off from the last few years where Nintendo has tended to have just one significant seller, such as Wonder, Jamboree or Legend ZA, during their October to December window. Obviously, Ocarina of Time isn't the only game that could fill this niche. A 3D Mario would have done the job, but there aren't actually all that many options for the Western market, I would say, of that kind of scale. Sadly, 2025 proved that Metroid wasn't going to cut it in this respect. And as I've mentioned at the top of the video, the capacity of Zelda to sell hardware, attested to by the launch of Switch Lite alongside Link's Awakening, is probably going to work out well for retail logistics. All that said, Zelda's 40th has been on the cards for literal decades, and some kind of Zelda bundle was, I think, a near inevitability. I think it's quite plausible that under different circumstances, Nintendo might have done what Nintendo did with Mario in the run-up to that movie, and did a Switch 2 bundle with an option of either Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, or, let's say, Echoes of Wisdom. Much they did bundles with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, or Super Mario Odyssey to promote those older but still valuable titles. It's not that these would sell better than a brand new game, but they could sell a new game, or at least a new version of an old game, at full price later on, and so it would still work out in the end. I think there's another version of 2026 where Mario is the big July or September game, and there is a pivot to Zelda from October-November. But another consideration behind pushing Zelda at this time over Mario is that they have lots of market and geopolitical circumstances to reckon with, and perhaps Nintendo can make significantly more as a margin on merchandise than on the machines themselves. And while the machines are obviously vital for locking in profits for the long term through the increased user base, Nintendo probably feel that the loss of 1 million consoles in October-November could be made up relatively quickly with a big February-March launch game, while the utility of a merchandising bonanza for Zelda could actually be quite profitable in the short term, especially as the movie trailers start to drop, and they will hope will spike big attention to the Zelda series. Ultimately, we can't know exactly the state of Nintendo's various projects, but we can infer that they will want big games linked to major windows and multiple titles in long-term development to give them maximum insurance and flexibility. My guess is that if they wanted to do a reverse of the Tears of the Kingdom release and drop a massive Mario game in the wake of the Zelda film, that would work for them more or less as well as launching during a holiday season, and that would be something worth holding a Mario game back for, which of course would also allow Pokemon free reign for the Thanksgiving slot in 2027. Of course, I don't think Nintendo will drop Ocarina on the 1st of October and then shut up shop for the quarter, but I also think they will be focused on smaller ventures and existing content over too many major releases in November. I've suggested a Luigi's Mansion 3 Nintendo Switch 2 edition would be the kind of thing that they could do pretty effectively in late October, and this will be a utilization of a popular title if they're not ready for a full Luigi's Mansion 4. I also suspect their Nintendo Switch 2 edition plan would be to maximize the amount of their true evergreens that are on the shelves so that these games can continue selling at a trickle that collectively would add up to a flood. Animal Crossing New Horizons, Switch Sports, Luigi's Mansion 3, Super Mario Party Jamboree, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Zelda Breath of the Wild, as well as less high-profile titles with their own reliable audiences like perhaps Clubhouse Games and Brain Training would collectively have a significant impact on this front if they're pushed afresh for Switch 2. Then there's smaller scale titles like WarioWare and new casual titles like Sing Party that could fit in nicely. If Nintendo wanted to go a little bigger, Fire Emblem is another possibility to be pushed for late October with its Japanese skewed audience, though it should be said that while GTA isn't anywhere near as big in Japan as elsewhere, it's still a major game even in that region, and they do want to see Fire Emblem pushed into the West and building on the success of Three Houses in that regard, so I suspect they will try to release Fire Emblem that much earlier. I could see a more niche, Japan-focused title like Famicom Detective Club, or more likely, so relatively soon after Emio, a remake of Shin Onigashima, being the kind of smaller project that they could push at the end of December though. And given that it's Zelda's birthday, I don't think a second Zelda besides Ocarina of Time is completely out of the question. If not a full-on Zelda like A Link Between Worlds, perhaps a re-release of Four Swords as a limited edition game for Switch 2. As a commenter called The Sunny suggested a few months ago, 40 Swords could be the perfect anniversary release title, and of course we did see Super Mario Bros. 35 a few years back. Now, I tried to crystallize my forecasts into a percentage framework for posterity, so let's give this a go with this tricky situation. 90% I think Nintendo will release at least 2 games during the Christmas quarter 2026. I just can't see them ceding the space entirely, so the only question is how they manage their schedule. 10% a Nintendo first-party release on the same day as GTA 6 happens. Needlessly complex logistically, even in Japan, so I think this is very unlikely. 50% they skip releasing games in November entirely. This would be extremely unusual. Even in 2017, they had Snipperclips Plus in November. But, and since October has 5 Thursdays, there's plenty of space in October to set out their wares while leaving November healthily clear. 50% a game releases that is first party during December. It's unusual for Nintendo not to have something on the slate during this period, even if it's only in Japan, but they may decide to keep their powder dry and simply have a bigger push in 2027. As ever, do let me know what you think and shout out to various people who have asked for this, including regular commenter Neoxon, who has raised this on several occasions. Hype, like and share to help the channel out. The Patreon has lots of cool stuff if you're interested in early, ad-free and exclusive content, but otherwise, thank you so much for being here, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.